What I want to trigger is the discussions in the family. I mean, how do we as a couple, as a family, want to manage careers with kids if that's the plan? I want people to think before they leave, what is actually my plan for coming back?
Welcome to Get Inspired, your podcast to feel connected, empowered and inspired by real-world role models and their stories of managing parenthood with successful careers. Our guest today is Laura Gersch, who has lots of experience dealing with parental leave from a manager's perspective as the CFO at Allianz Insurance. For new parents wanting to still have a career, her advice is invaluable. The host of this podcast is Ricarda Engelmeier, founder and CEO at MyCollective.
Laura, welcome to MyCollective. I'm so glad that you're here. There are a couple of topics that I think are really interesting, specifically because you've kind of lived through all of what our participants are doing. You've gone through a career, maybe as a short introduction. You are now currently CFO of the Allianz Versicherungs-AG, but you have a background in consulting. There are some consultants here amongst us. You are also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. And I'm not going to go through all of the different positions that you had at Allianz, but there was one which I was thinking was specifically interesting to mention today, because you were board member of Allianz, also responsible for HR and corporate pension at one point of time. And it seems from when I looked at your LinkedIn and it says you're speaking out for diversity, equal pension and Altersvorsorge. This is a topic that I definitely want to talk to you about today. So welcome and thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and it's great to be here, and it's very good to see that you are all keeping in touch somehow during the parental leave. I think it's very important, so very happy to be here.
Yeah, and actually what you were just saying, keeping in touch, is sort of what I would like to start talking to you about, because I remember when we first met, you said that you make it a personal priority to actually see everyone who's returning from parental leave to your part of Allianz. And I was thinking, can you share a little bit on, first of all, why you're doing this and also how you're doing it? Because I guess there are quite a number of people actually coming back from parental leave.
Yeah, and very happy to share, of course. Actually, I'm doing these talks before people go into parental leave. And I try also to be, of course, in touch. And then when they come back, we also have a discussion. But what I figured out, and therefore I think it's good that you keep in touch during the time, that before going into parental leave, there are a lot of official programs, of course. So you get all your information that you need to about being in parental leave and then returning. But what I realized that some colleagues just go into parental leave without a clear plan how to return. And then it's really hard to keep in touch. So this is what MyCollective is the solution for, of course. But if this is not in place, then I figured out some people are just not asking the question beforehand, what is my plan actually? And I realized that at least having a plan is quite helpful. It doesn't mean that you finally will realize the plan, because babies are not, you cannot plan everything around babies, that's for sure. But I'm doing it because I want people to think before they leave, what is actually my plan for coming back.
And with plan, you mean sort of when, at what point of, like how long they would stay on parental leave and what kind of working model they want to return to?
Okay, exactly. So this is the duration of the parental leave, the returning model. And it's especially about returning. What is the model they think might be good for them? Because this is probably easier to think about before the kid is there, at least in theory, right? Of course, then you need to adjust for reality and practice. But to think how you would like to handle it beforehand is very valuable. And also to have the discussion with your partner. And here also how I'm doing these kind of talks, it's only with asking questions. Because actually I'm not interested in the answer. Often I'm the boss, right? So I'm not even probably allowed to get the answers because it's not my business. But what I want to trigger is to trigger the discussions about also in the family. I mean, how do we as a couple, as a family want to manage careers with kids, if that's the plan? I mean, if you have another plan, it's also fine. But if the idea is to come back at some point and to somehow juggle 2 jobs and kids, then I think it's very valuable to ask some questions up front and to trigger the thinking process.
And not only discuss it with your partner, but sort of also with yourself, discuss for yourself what is your priority. and ultimately also set up. And I mean, we basically started with MyCollective a week before lockdown number 1. So most of our participants has gone through Corona times and and a couple of restructurings also in the company. So you kind of have a plan on how you want to go back and where you want to go back, but then we all live in a dynamic industry, so things might actually be different when you come back, and you kind of have to adjust for that. So it has to stay dynamic. What would your recommendation be for other companies in terms of how to set this up as a system? Because what you're doing is sort of personally motivated, right? And you do it privately or personally yourself. What would you say is a good system to actually allow this to happen? Is it a kind of a regimen that you say a talk has to happen, or some kind of stay in contact procedure has to happen? Is that something that you would recommend, or?
Of course, this is something that an HR function can trigger, but I think it's really important that you also have the discussion with first someone you trust, and ideally someone from your team or your boss, ideally. I mean, that would probably be the ideal case, that before someone leaves for parental leave or when coming back is planned, that you have the discussion really in a formalized way, because I think also some bosses or some team leaders, they are just afraid of having this discussion. I'm also confronted with the question, I mean, why do you dare to ask these questions? And I mean, the point is, I just offer the talk, right? If someone doesn't come, it's also fine for me. It's just I offer the talk and I ask the questions, and I also give the opportunity to ask questions to me, because this was something that was missing for me, or I see missing for many people, that you don't have anybody you can ask questions to. But I think many team leaders also, they just don't dare to have these kinds of discussion and to give some kind of a guidance how you can lead these discussions, and also to take away the responsibility that you need to find the solution. I mean, in the end, the solution the person who goes into parental leave needs to find. You can just a bit steer, provide an overview of options that are out there, and perhaps share a little bit about your personal experience if there is some. So I think incentivizing, or at least supporting these discussions, would be really important. I think there are also a lot of official programs that you can, of course, do, something like MyCollective or staying in touch in a different form. This is very important. But in the end, also to have an exchange between then perhaps people who have lived through a similar experience. I think that would also be very beneficial, to have a network within the company where you can perhaps also on a peer level can ask just every question, right? At least my feeling is, in Germany, we still talk too little about these topics, and there are still not sufficient role models. And I don't mean role models in a sense that everything is perfect, but just in a sense that talking about how different models can look like. And here sharing among each other is very powerful, I think.
I mean, sharing among each other is also a very good option if you don't have a boss like you. So if you happen to be in an environment where maybe your immediate superior or your team lead or whoever you're talking to does not react in the same way. And I think, I mean, we talk to a lot of companies, not only our partner companies here at MyCollective, but also generally in the market. Quite often there are some 1, 2 or more people in the board who actually see themselves as drivers for diversity and totally see that it's important not only to retain your top talents, but obviously also to create more diversity. But this doesn't necessarily mean that this is everywhere in the entire company. So for some of the sort of parental leavers to return, you might actually face someone who says, I don't know, I've never seen an Abteilungsleiter or any kind of similar job in an 80% position. This is not possible, has never been possible, so you're not allowed to do it. So what do you recommend there? I mean, what would be your strategy? Escalate it, try to find other people around? Is it the peers approach?
I think peers is one approach, definitely. First, I would ask myself, is it the right company really before you enter into the endeavor of having children? Because sometimes it's not. Probably with all the companies present here it is, hopefully. But sometimes you also need to have a clear decision beforehand. But this is rare, I think. I think in most cases it will work out. And then I think there are 2 other options. Really think about the person you would like to talk to, because perhaps it's your boss. And I think there are different types. I mean, either they have their own experience, then normally it should be easy to talk to. If not, I have seen 2 categories. The one is those who are convinced by numbers. And there is a clear business case, right, to being a diverse company and having a diverse workforce. And I think even now with the war for talent, it's even getting stronger on the numbers side to say why it's important that you come back for the company. So this is the one aspect. And the other, which works very well as well, is especially for a bit older men, if they have daughters. This is for me very powerful. Once they have daughters, try to somehow relate to the daughters and that you are living what their daughter will live in the future. And then if they make the case for you that you are kind of the role model daughter, then that also works very, very well. So this is just two personal tips perhaps that are very different. The one more the factual and the other more the emotional part.
That's funny, the daughter factor, obviously, it's a good one if you have a more senior sort of person to talk to. Now, what you mentioned before is you have to have a plan and a kind of model in your head of how you return. We talk a lot about fluid, innovative working models, anything from leadership in part-time, joint leadership, flexible hours, and all of them are mainly attributed to parents, right? It doesn't need to be to mothers, but it's to fathers as well who are active as parents. And we had a really interesting discussion with Bettina Al-Sadiq just in one of our last Impulse sessions, who has done research across 5 countries. I think it was Germany, France, Russia, China, and Japan. And she had none of her interview partners had actually gone for one of these models. They've all gone for the returning super fast and returning full-time kind of model. Can you give me a bit of a reality check on your perspective on these innovative working models? Is it a kind of wishful thinking that we think this actually leads back to the career track? When you talk to people and they come back and they have a plan and they tell you about the model that they want to return to, do you think this is feasible? And which of these models is feasible in your opinion?
Yeah, very happy. And of course, I'm also happy to share mine. And I fall probably in the flexibility category, but also in the category full-time and relatively fast. I mean, that's also clear in my case. But I think first it's the question, what do you mean by career, right? If you want to continue progressing, this is what I would now talk about. Not that you want to somehow stay in the job and perhaps then 10 years later you might again go on the career track. But at least they have a steady kind of improvement or career track. And then reality check. I think flexibility works really well, and COVID has done a big push in that dimension because everyone, also all those who have formally said it's impossible to work from home or so, they now know it's possible. So I think here flexibility works, and this means that you don't need to be present all the time from morning till evening in some kind of office location. This means that you can have some hour break in the afternoon and then return to the laptop or so in the evening if your job allows this kind of a working model. I think that by now it's a no-brainer and this works. So if full-time flexibility, that's my model. I have hours where I'm not available and my boss knows about these hours and my team knows as well. And for me, this works very well. And then, of course, flexibility also means on both sides, right? I would say in my case, in 95% of days, it works out. But then there are the 5% of days when we have a board meeting or something like that, then of course I need to be flexible as well and be present where I'm needed. So I think flexibility works. I think in terms of part-time, it depends on what the job is and what the share of part-time is. If it's below 50, I think it's good to stay in touch and it's good to stay somehow in the topic or in what your job is, right? And to see the developments and also to stay in touch with the team. But realistically, if you want to progress, I have rarely seen it with a real 50% kind of model. If it's 80% or 70% plus, I think it works very well. It's clearly possible. It's only the question whether you really work only 80%. And I had this in my team and I asked my team members to please go to 100% so that I can pay them 100% because I saw them delivering 110% 10% of output, and they were just saying, I want to work 80% for their better feeling. And I think that's not okay, right? So please be...
The flexibility, right?
Yeah, exactly. Then it's flexibility, right? If you want to go to the ballet session of your daughter on Friday afternoon, for this you should not work 80%, right? So this is then flexibility. But if it's full 80% and you really take a full day off, then I think it can work. I think the best model actually is job sharing, if you really want to combine it all, because then you, for all parties, for the bosses, for the person, him or herself, and for the team, it's even better than just having one, because normally you don't go on holiday together, right? So there's always one there. You are not sick together, so there's one there. You have an integrated mentor, you have an integrated coach, you have someone on your peer that you can fully ideally then trust, right? I have had that in my team. It was a smaller fight to install this couple because we were the first to do it. It was 5 years ago, I think. It worked out perfectly for everyone. So for the couple, for me as a boss, and for the team. So I think this is really ideal, because then it's also 50% for you, or we did 60%. And it's a real 60% for the person doing this. It's a 120% for the boss, and it's a 120% for the team.
So double, triple plus for tandems. I think that's a very good one. And it's definitely something that some of our participants are also thinking about and planning on returning. Now, maybe one last question is, all of these percentages, right? The reductions, also the time out, leads to a reduction in pension, right? And you've been talking about this quite a lot. It was part of your job, but I think you've also took it on you as a passion to actually fight for this. What does it mean? What would be your solution? Is it take less time, keep some percent working, or how do you sort of fill the gap, the pension gap that ultimately immediately arises from any kind of sabbatical or parental leave?
And it's interesting that you mentioned it, because actually I brought it from my private life to my business life, because I was so surprised to see when I had my children and we were discussing these kind of topics, how many people in my family and friends setting were not considering the long-term impacts of what the short-term decisions are, right? I don't want to interfere in a very private and personal decision about your life and how you set up your life. This is not my business, right? I just want every one of us to be aware that reducing the hours and having gaps in your professional life are the main reasons, together with the gender pay gap, why we have a gender pension gap in Germany, which is significantly higher than 40%. So women in Germany have 40% less old age pension income. And this is, first solution is work full time, of course. This is one of the options. And also tend to really take money to also have a setup that allows you to work full time, because it always pays off. It really always pays off. And I'm not saying this from my position where I am today. When I had my first kid, I was some kind of Abteilungsleiter, so team leader, a bit experienced team leader, and it really pays off. Another solution is that you have the discussion with your partner, right? If one person, and it doesn't need to be the woman, with my, I have this in my family and friends, it's the man who is reducing hours, and they have an exchange then in terms of the pension of the person who reduces hours is paid from the family income. We all pay the bills of housing, of electricity, and of food somehow from our family income. But when it comes to pension, I very often see it's not paid from the family income. So the person who reduces hours pays from the reduced hour pay, then a little pension. But this is not what is fair in terms of the care work that is related to the being a parent, right? So I think having these discussions, just putting your pension scheme from the state next to each other and having a check, what is the difference? Do we think this is fair? I think we all need to have these kinds of discussions. And then there are all kind of options, be it a pension insurance, of course, be it a transfer of money or whatever the solution is. I don't want to sell here anything. It's just I want to have all people to have these discussions.
discussions, and there are various options open as well, right? So in terms of setting up your portfolio or even kind of insurance, I think there are lots of options. And so you said you shared a couple of personal things. Can I ask you one last personal question? You were saying that you bring the personal into the professional life. Can you maybe share one of your parenting skills that you managed to convert into a leadership skill in your professional life?
Oh, clearly. And there are tons of, right? I mean, I think this is why I'm so excited also about the idea of MyCollective, because it's not only to stay in touch, but it's also how you really bring back everything you learn as being a parent into the workforce. And this is something, the value is huge. Personally, I think for me, the one thing that I learned from my parental leave actually is that I can delegate. I was not so very capable of delegating beforehand. And then I was away for 3 months and my team worked without me and it worked perfectly. And then I asked myself, actually, why am I needed? And then I found out why am I needed, and I reprioritized all my tasks, and I took away a lot of operational to-dos and shifted my priorities and my focus. I would have never been able to do that in this short moment of time without being away for 3 months and having a kid. So this is my number one, clearly. And there are a lot of others, be it communication, be it seeing the strengths of a person. Having 2 children, same genes, right? But being so different persons, seeing what the strengths are and building on those strengths is always the same with employees, right? A strength-based leadership approach from my perspective is very powerful. And there are a lot of others. So trust, you will learn a lot that you can also use back in your job.
Yeah, I really like the delegating. We call it the art of letting loose, because that's actually what you kind of have to learn it. Laura, thank you so much for being with us. I hope you have a couple of more minutes to stay with us for a discussion, but I would like to say thank you here and goodbye for this podcast.